Welcome back everyone, it is Mike from ManaHoarders. In this video we are bringing you a commander deck tech for some mono blue partner commanders, Eligeth, Crossroads Augur, and Siana, Eye of the Storm. For 4 and 2 blue we can cast Eligeth, Crossroads Augur. This 5/6 legendary Sphinx with flying will allow us to draw the number of cards that we would normally scry, and Siana, Eye of the Storm. For 3 and a blue we get a 3/2 Jin Monk with flying. Whenever Siana, Eye of the Storm attacks, we can scry X, where X is the number of attacking creatures with flying. Before we dive into the deck, let's go over a few key points. First up, the final price for this build came in at $61.38. This does include the price of our commanders and all of our lands. Now do bear in mind this price will vary greatly depending on the quality of the cards you purchase, the vendor you use, and a variety of other factors. In terms of power level, I would rate this deck at around a 5 or 6 out of 10 on the power scale. We will obviously be running plenty of flying creatures to generate value and deal damage if needed. We have plenty of counter magic and other ways to interact with our opponents and their boards to make sure they don't get too far ahead. And last but not least, we want to turn this possible card draw into an advantage, either by making our opponents mill or by making them lose life along the way. Speaking to our mill strategy, we have our 3 highlight cards, Maddening Cacophony. For 1 and a blue, each opponent will mill 8 cards, but if we kick the spell, each opponent will mill half their deck rounded up. Capitalizing off of that card draw, Psychic Corrosion. Whenever we draw a card, each opponent will mill 2 cards. And if we have one target in particular, Traumatized, target player will put the top half of his or her library rounded down into his or her graveyard. Now, if our mill strategy hasn't quite taken off, we have ways to pump up our flying creatures. Favorable Winds, Sprite Noble, and Windstorm Drake will pump up all of our flyers so we can deal a lot more damage in the air. Now let's dive into the remainder of the deck with our artifacts. Cumber Stone, creatures our opponents control get -1/-0. Kefnet's Monument, blue creature spells we cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever we cast a creature spell, target creature an opponent controls doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. Mind Stone can add a colorless and also potentially draw us a card. Sky Diamond can tap to add a blue mana, and Soul Ring will tap to give us 2 colorless mana. For our enchantments, Coastal Piracy, whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to an opponent, we will draw a card. Dampening Pulse will also give creatures our opponents control -1/-0. Ominous Seas will get a Foreshadow counter every time we draw a card. If we remove 8 Foreshadow counters, we can generate an 8/8 Kraken creature token. And Sigil of Sleep, whenever the enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, we can return target creature that player controls to its owner's hand. We will be including 1 Planeswalker in this build. Card draw is very powerful in Commander, so we want to deny our opponents with Narset Parter of Veils. It makes it so each opponent can't draw more than 1 card each turn. We can also -2 to look at the top 4. We can reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into our hand. We'll put the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. Soaring into our creatures, we have Augury Owl. Whenever it enters, we can scry 3. Bay Falcon has flying and vigilance. Briarberry Cohort has flying and gets +1/+1 as long as we control another blue creature. Cloud Sprite can only block other creatures with flying. Cloud Kinseer, whenever it enters we can draw a card. Coastal Watcher has flying and protection from green. Crashing Drawbridge can tap to give our creatures haste. Fairy Seer, whenever it enters we can scry 2. Hypnotic Sprite also gives us Mesmeric Glare. We can counter target spell with converted mana cost 3 or less. Jace's Phantasm will get +4/+4 as long as an opponent has 10 or more cards in his or her graveyard. Kefnet the Mindful, this 5/5 god with flying and indestructible, can't attack or block unless we have 7 or more cards in our hand. Oneriophage has flying, and whenever we draw a card it'll get a 1/1 counter put on it. Nadir Kraken, whenever we draw we can pay 1. If we do, it'll get a +1/+1 counter and create a 1/1 tentacle creature token. Ornithopter is a nice flyer for 0. Psychosis Crawler, whenever we draw a card each opponent will lose 1 life. Sea Sprite has flying and protection from red. A very powerful card in this build, Soulblade Jhin. Whenever we cast non-creature spell, creatures we control will get +1/+1 until end of turn. A personal favorite of mine from the new Theros, Sphinx Mindbreak. Whenever it enters, each opponent will put the top 10 cards of their library into their graveyard. Sphinx of Foresight will allow us to scry 1 at the beginning of our upkeep. Sphinx of the Final Word, a 5/5 that can't be countered with flying and hexproof, makes it so our instants and sorceries can't be countered. Thrix of the Sudden Storm, it has flash and flying, and it makes it so spells we cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less, and they can't be countered. Warden of Evos Isle will make our flyers cost 1 less. Windreader Sphinx, whenever a creature with flying attacks, we can draw a card. Moving on to our sorceries. Armed with Aether, our creatures will be able to deal damage to our opponents and bounce their creatures back to their hand. Clear the Mind, target player will shuffle their graveyard into their library and will draw. 4C, we can scry 4 and then draw 2. Gust of Wind, this will cost 2 less if we have a flyer. We can return target non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand, and then we can draw 1. Mystic Speculation, we can scry 3 for 1 mana. We can also buy it back for 2. Preordain, we can scry 2 and then draw a card. Sleep, we can tap all creatures target player controls and they will not untap during that player's next untap step. Temporal Mastery will allow us to take an extra turn. And Winged Worlds will cost 1 less if we have a flyer, we can draw 2 cards. For our instants, Aetherize and Aether Spouts will both bounce any attacking creatures. Boomerang can return target permanent to its owner's hand. With Deliberate, we can scry 2 and then draw. Essence Capture will counter target creature spell. We can put a 1/1 counter on target creature we control. Evacuation will return all creatures to their owner's hands. Fated Infatuation, we can put a token on the battlefield as a copy of target creature we control, and if it's our turn, we can scry 2. Lofty Denial will counter target spell unless its controller pays 1, but if we have a flyer, they will have to pay 4. Mana Leak will counter target spell unless their controller pays 3. Negate, we can counter target non-creature spell. With Opt, we can scry 1 and draw 1. Perilous Voyage, we can return target non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand. If the CMC was 2 or less, we can scry 2. Quench can counter target spell unless its controller pays 2. Spell Pierce can counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 2. And Unsummon for 1, we can return target creature to its owner's hand. And last but not least, our lands. We will be including Reliquary Tower due to the fact we'll be drawing a ton of cards. And to fill it out, we will have 34 basic islands. And just like that, we've reached the end of another Commander Deck Tech. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. Also, leave a comment down below. Let us know what commanders you would like to see us build around in the future. We really appreciate the support.